Hi, this is Christy McGee, and in this tutorial I'll show you how we can build show-hide items or objects that operate with the single button. If you're really lucky, then I'll add in how to adjust your views so that the show and hide button doesn't necessarily have to be in the exact same place. Let's get started. So we're going to change this beginning dashboard into this finished product. Now you see that you have a lot more real estate when you're able to put your filters off the sheet. So to show you again, you see your filters on this sheet. We're going to put this in a show hide container. So at the end, our project will look like this. You hit your filters and your filters pop up here. You make your selections, you hit apply, and they go away. So let's see, how do you do it? So we're going to break this up into two different sections, about 50-50. Half of it's going to be in Tableau, and the other half is going to be actually in the TWB file in your text editor. That comes through as an XML file, and Tableau doesn't really endorse monkeying around with a lot of that, but that's what you need to do to enable these different options. I'm going to say now, and I'll say every time I can, to save as much as you can, and you know, the XML, when we get to that point, we'll test at each iteration. As far as the first section goes, we're going to create 3 different objects. You see right here is an actual, it's a simulation of what we're going to be building. We have a filter background, which is this section here. We're going to put a filter shadow box on, so it makes those filters really pop. And we're going to pull our filters in, so it'll be like a container like this. So we're also going to make sure that we do this in an order so that they are layered correctly. That's one of the most important parts to this, and we're going to name our different containers in a naming convention that we'll actually remember. Here is my initial dashboard, and I've highlighted where I'm at right now with the show hide container. And you can see, click the drop down, you do not have the option to create a show hide for this container. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start creating our layers. So once I go to item hierarchy, you can see that everything is tiled. So I don't want to have to search for this one later. So I'm going to go ahead and make this a floating container. So I'm going to click the little drop down and make that floating. Since I did that, now you can see this, now it's called a vertical container. I'm going to right click that and rename it using a naming convention that makes sense to me. You should do the same for yourself, of course. I'm going to call this asterisk filters. That way I can find it in the XML when we get to that point. The next piece I want to do is bring out a horizontal container. It can be a vertical if that's what you choose, but I want to make that filter background. So I don't have to add anything to this, but I'm going to go to the layout and I'm going to go ahead and size it for the whole screen so that I know our width is 1320 and our height is 883. And I'm going to change my color for that background to this color here. And so I can make my dashboard still visible underneath the filter shadow box, but I want the shadow box to really pop. I'm going to change that background opacity to about 90%. And you see when you've done that, now you have another container, a horizontal container. I'm going to rename that because I want to control that as well. Rename that filter background. Now I just have one more to create, and that is the image for the shadow box. So I'm going to bring out another object, and I'm going to just drag in my image. I've got one that I've already made. You can save it anywhere. It doesn't have to be in your shapes folder for this exercise. And I want to fit and center that. I'm not going to have a target URL or an alt text because I don't want to see anything or click anything, go anywhere with it. You see, now I can double click this and I've got my container. I'm going to want it a little bigger. That looks about right, and it looks about centered. Maybe I'll make it a little bit bigger. And I'm going to rename this container. You see, now I have 3 different containers and then my tiled. I'll rename this filter shadow. If you have multiple dashboards and you're doing this for multiple things, you might want to have in the name of the number dashboard it is, the dashboard 1 filter shadow, whatever you want. Anyway, so I hit OK. And I want to change the order, because if you remember in our steps, the steps should be that the filters are on top, of course, so you can actually filter them, then the shadow box, the container, and then the dashboard. The only thing that you have to do, you can either right-click this filter container and say floating order, bring the front, or you can also just drag it till this black line goes wherever you want it to be. Now it's in the front. I'm going to reformat this to look a little bit like I want to. For some reason it fell back behind. Let's do that again. So I'm going to reformat this and I'll pick right back up in a minute so you don't have to see me changing colors and stuff. So now I've reformatted. I made the text white and the little text on the body white, but you'll notice that when you go now to region to the drop down, you can't see anything. So I'm going to change that to another view. I'll change it to single value list. Makes it a little bit easier. Now I can resize that a little bit more so there's no little scroll bar or anything of that nature. This is the hardest part, to get everything just right the way you want it to look visually. And I think when I did that, I had made that a fixed height. So I'm going to center it a little bit. And the next thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to save this. So now that we have our filters, filter shadow and filter background objects all created the way we want them, it's time to add our show hide button. I'm going to start by selecting the entire container for the filters and just clicking the drop down and say show hide button. Now we'll be able to play with this a little bit later, but you can see that hitting the drop down and saying edit button, it only allows you to operate for one object. We're going to change that in the next section where we go through how to make that apply to all 3 objects. For right now though, I'm going to leave it the way it is. I'm going to hit OK, and I'm going to save this file as a TWB file. That way I can open up the XML in Visual Studio Code, or you can do it in whatever software that you have, whatever text editor. So go ahead and open up your text editor, and we'll open up the file in the next section. So in section 2, XML Modification, we'll be opening up the TWB file in our text editor, and we're going to change the behavior of that show hide button to control multiple objects. The first thing we'll do is look for each one of those containers that we've created, and we'll note their IDs, and we'll add them to the filter button. We're going to save that TWB file in our text editor and reopen it in Tableau to make sure that it works. As a bonus, because a lot of times your show hide buttons, you might want them in different areas. I'll show you how to do that, where you actually have 2 buttons that work the same 3 objects. So I've opened up our show hide multiple TWB file in Visual Studio Code. And if this is the first time you've been in the XML for this, don't be alarmed. It's really not as complicated as it looks. It's got a certain flow to it, and all we're really going to do is look at these few little objects. So I'm going to hit Control A, Control F, so I can search the whole thing. And I want to look for those items that we had saved, those containers. So I'm going to resize my little screen here. and I can say star filter, and you've got, there it goes. So we've got star filter shadow, star filters, star filter background, and what we want, and I'm going to write down, are these little IDs. So 49, 50, and 37. So what we know is that since we had created that filter button from the star filters, that's probably the ID that's already there. But we want to add 49 and 50 to the same list. So I just wrote that down, and I'm going to look for my little filter button. So I can see here it's ID 53. And so you can tell that it actually, what it works by looking through and seeing an ID from something you recognize. We knew that it was for zone ID 37 because that's what the filter, the asterisk filters ID was too. So we're going to add in a comma and add in our other two IDs, 49 and 50. I'm going to save it. So I've saved my file, and I've left it open over here, but I'm going to go ahead and reopen here. And now that little X should now work all three options. There you go. Now you have a show hide button that operates multiple containers. So now we actually have a file that the button actually controls all three objects. We want to change this, of course. So let's go ahead and hit your drop down and change the button. Now the natural object, the natural thing that it's going to show you is what happens when it's shown. But we actually we don't necessarily want to change what it is when it's shown, but let's go ahead and select item hidden and change it there. I want to select a filters button that a user sees when the filters are not present. So I've selected my image, and I'm going to show a tooltip that says show filters. So now if I hit OK, and I hold down Alt because we're not in the presentation view, and I hit the X button, now I see my filters button. You might have to resize this based on how big you need this button. So initially mine came through tiny like that. So I just resized it to what I need. And I wanted to put it up at the top right hand side. And so I had to put a little, had to make a little magic underneath the title for the dashboard. So now I have a filters button that brings up everything. But what I actually want is an apply button. I don't really want this X right there, and I don't want the users to necessarily see it, but I want an apply button here because that's where the users are looking. So this is a little cheat, but I'm going to go ahead and on my dashboard, I'm going to drag out another container, and I can name this container just anything I want, because in the end I'm going to get rid of it. So I've just named it 4 asterisks, and I'm going to create a show hide button. Add show hide button. I can drag that anywhere I want. Even if the container has to be floating, the button can be affixed in a fixed container. So I'm going to change this now, edit my button, so that it is operating for this container. But when it's shown, when the object is shown, I want to change this to an apply button. And I'm going to change my tooltip to say apply filters. I hit OK. Now I need to rename this button. If I didn't, I'm going to resize this first. But if I didn't rename that button, it'd be very, very difficult to see in my in the Visual Studio. Resize that to something a little bit more appropriate, and it means I need to resize the whole thing. Apparently I had to lock that down, so that should work. Okay, so I'm going to rename my button now to asterisk apply and hit OK. So I'm going to save the file. Just hit Control S to save the file. And I still have Visual Studio Code open with that file. And so it just opens it again for me. So I'm going to search for that apply button, and I want to see what object it is changing, and I want to change it to those 3 other objects that we talked about before. So let's search for it. Control A, Control F, and search for apply. So here's my little button. It is ID 55, and it works for zone ID 54. Well, here I can change it immediately to the 37, 49, and 50. And so you can see here that this is the image it has when it is showing, and there is no image that it has when it's hidden so far. It's going to be the default image, but we'll change that in just a second. We want to make sure that this works properly first. I'm going to go ahead and save. And I can reopen the file in Tableau. Even though it's open, I can just go again and just reopen it. So let me find that. So let's see. It didn't ask me if I wanted to save any changes because technically I hadn't made any. Now if I hit apply, so now your buttons work. I hit X. See, it's kind of funky though. So there's, you have to almost double hit it. And now that apply button is gone and you see the default image there. You can do a couple of things. You can either make apply the button here on show and hide and filter the button there on show and hide. But what I really want is my filter button to be blank here. And it doesn't really matter here since it's rolled up here. Nobody's ever going to see this. It can be blank or it can be apply, whatever. But now I can get rid of this container. So that container is gone and my show hide button, my hide button still works. But it's got this weird kludgy behavior to it. We just need to add a line of code. So since I've done that the thing where I took off the container, I'm going to go ahead and save this. And now get ready for the code. So you've been with me long enough. And now we're at the point where we want to take that apply button and make it work a little bit more predictably with the filter button. And it's time to add our little line of code. So I'm going to go through and look for my apply button. So I'm going to hit Control A, Control F. Come on. And find my apply. So I see here, apply is here, and I'd already fixed it. So let me take out my little fix real quick. I didn't realize that. And what it says is that it is zone 55. So the way to read this below is to say that this is the item, this is the GUID, and it's zone 55 is controlling these 3 zones. So that's right. But we actually want to add in the other filter buttons apply to because we want it to work in tandem. And we only have to do it for the apply button. We don't necessarily have to do it for the filter button. So I'm going to copy this little section. Copy, and then I'm going to paste it again. So, and have a little space. And put this ID in too. So it's going to be 55 and 53. And I'm going to go ahead and save this. And so now when I open up the file, so now I have my file. It's still kind of ugly, but I should be able, I'm going to hold down Alt again, hit apply, hit apply. That goes away. I hit filters and it shows up. And filters. The only thing I really want to change is what shows up right here. I must have lost my apply image. So it's on the shown, but not on the image. I'm going to go ahead and make it apply on both the shown and the hidden views because nobody's ever going to see it otherwise. I'm going to do the same thing for the filter button too. So now I hit apply, My filter's up here. I'm going to edit that button too. You could make that blank if you wanted to keep it on this level. So there's a couple of things you can do. You can have a null item, and so I have a copy of a null item right here. So now when I'm going to go to presentation mode and I hit filters, you don't see it, but it is technically there. You can apply. Or if you want people to always be able to see where that's at, you could also make that the filter button too. So you can say when it's shown, you want, instead of the null, you want the filter button. The only thing I would change with this is instead of having it up front, you can place it underneath the background. So now when you go to presentation mode and you hit filters, it's still there, but nobody can click it. They can see it, but can't click it. Hit apply and hit filters, whatever you wanted to do. So that's what I have for you. And if you've got any questions or anything, please let me know. Drop me a note. Thank you, and I hope that this helps.